No
Welcome
problem.
everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Amy Stevens, Chief Executive Gifted, and I'm here with Andrew Day, who's a Director and our Chairman. Here today to talk about recovery and resilience in these most challenging of times. So thinking about, how can we have successful fundraising during this time and keep fundraising on track and keep hitting targets. We're recording the webinar and it'll be online on our resources page on the website in a couple of days. So any colleagues want to catch it again, just direct them there, or anyone who's missing it today. We've got a variety of organisations online with us today, a whole range from churches, cathedrals to hospitals, hospices, heritage venues, youth organisations, etc. So hopefully we'll kind of try and cover everything, something for all of you. If you do have any questions, if you pop them in the Q&A, we'll address them all at the end of the webinar, and we'll go from there. So we'll get started. And before we actually talk about how to recover and be resilient, we're going to look at where are we now. So recently we put out a survey online, and thanks to all of those of you who did respond to that, to really look at where is the third sector, where are the charities sitting at the moment, what challenges have you been facing, so we can try and offer the best guidance for the way forward. We closed that last week, so we're going to look at some of the headline results of it initially to think where are we now, but that full report will be available to you. Excuse me, that'll be through our website, but if you would like that emailing to you, please just pop Julie, our colleague, a line. Her email will be at the end of this presentation and she'll send that to you as soon as it's ready. What we did in that survey as well was actually break that down sector specific. So we'll be able to see what different sectors have faced different challenges, and I'm sure you all will have. So, a church, for example, may have faced completely different challenges to an NHS charity during the pandemic. So we'll look at overall results now, and the report will drill down into some of those finer detail for you. So first of all, which of the following statements best describes how your charity has been affected since March? Really interesting. So around 60% of respondents actually said either fundraising's been more successful or you've been able to maintain, particularly with help from those special COVID-19 funds that have been launched, and all the grant makers who, stopped their general grant making and focused on COVID only. So actually quite encouraging to see that 60% have had either a positive or maintained their activity and income. But there is, of course, that large amount, so 38% there in the red have seen a significant decrease, and as just a small number saying we don't know if our charity will survive the next year. So obviously something we need to look at to offer guidance on there. Income streams is the next one. So which income streams declined the most since March 2020? Some interesting results here, some very predictable, such as the income generation. So charity shops, those organisations that have lots of charity shops really felt that hit when they all closed. Corporate giving, obviously, we all know declined, and community giving, we weren't able to hold those big events, the sponsored walks, the runs, etc. Interesting that regular giving's so high there, and I suspect that may be because we did have a significant number of respondents from churches and cathedrals, which obviously rely on that plate giving weekly. Many aren't set up to have that online regular giving capacity. But when we break down the data and look at those sector specific areas, we'll be able to give a bit more guidance on why that figure is where it is. But other than that, no real surprises on the income streams that have declined. But then looking at which income streams have increased since March. Obviously for some people, none of those increased. But for others, the online obviously is the really obvious one. People really geared up. I think if you have a company selling online services at the minute, you've done incredibly well over the last few months, activating people online. Interestingly as well, the major giving there. It's been interesting for us as we've continued to work over the spring, summer and into the autumn, speaking to people like wealth managers, for example, who, have been saying, actually, the wealthy are still giving. they're still giving, but they're being more particular about their gifts. So whereas somebody might have spread their annual gift allocation, they're now giving all of that to the charity they care most about, which I think is really interesting. So it's pleasing to see actually that people have seen that increase in major giving. And I think if you have seen that, it reflects obviously perhaps the targeted message you were putting out at that time, but also that you have really strong relationships with your major givers, because if you've continued that dialogue, you know, this was the time when you needed them to step up the most, and it looks like they have done there, which is interesting. Prediction for the fundraising targets this financial year. So over 35% believe they'll be on budget, which is great to see, and a few even exceeding budget, which would be fantastic. But if we look there, there's those, the remainder is almost 60% will be below budget, 20% of which more than 50% below. So we need to think about how we address that. How do we come out of that and move forwards? And then finally, how has the pandemic affected your overall fundraising strategy? Really interesting. So only 14% there felt that their strategy held up well and are confident in its future. So that's the column on the far right-hand side there. All the others are needing attention. So for many, it made us realise we rely too heavily on some income streams. And I think a lot of charities have realised that during the pandemic. Some making tweaks, some needing a complete overhaul, and others thinking, actually, turns out we never really had a defined strategy and we really should think about that. So whilst, you know, it's been an incredibly challenging time, I think if we can look at any positives to come out of the pandemic, one of those is that charities will probably be more resilient going forwards, because the pandemic and all the pressures it's put on us is forcing us as fundraising professionals to really think about strategy more carefully, and have a more robust strategy. And I think long term, the third sector will actually benefit from that. So there's some stats for now. Like I say, the report will have much more for you, but that kind of outlines for us where we are at the moment. And I'm going to pass to Andrew now to talk about some of the ways we can address strategy, and think about how we proceed forward through the next year or so.
Thanks, Amy. Well, look, these are two tools, if you like, in our toolbox to help us deal with that big question about where do we go to next. I think the whole world could probably use a recovery audit just now, but these tools, we're going to run through the details now, hopefully so you firstly understand the difference between a recovery audit and doing a fundraising strategy review, and also the key elements of each of those particular tools so that you can see the benefits. The recovery audit is really very immediate. You know, it's what's been the struggle. Looking back at the stats that Amy's just shared with us, if you reflect on your own organisation, where have been the weak points for you, and where are you falling behind? But also focusing out on where are the big wins. What's fascinating for me, at least, reviewing those stats, because I love major gifts work. As you know, I'm probably the world's laziest fundraiser. I like to get a few rather large gifts and move on. But it's interesting to see that major gifts have actually stepped up. And I think it really underscores those organizations that are staying close, if you like, to their institutional godparents, saying thank you, sharing the story, keeping them up to date with the challenges that are there, but also the opportunities. And therein, you know, getting more big major gifts. So where are the big wins for you is really understanding what opportunities this crisis, this pandemic has brought forward, but also coming out of it. Remember, we will come out of this. What's the terrain going to look like, and where are the opportunities for your organization there? And then really, what are your next steps? It's an immediate, keenly focused process, a recovery audit, to get the pulse back to build out your budget for the immediate period. If we look at the next slide, Amy, thank you. Right, arguably for the recovery audit is those not only who've done well during COVID-19, but obviously those who've struggled. You need to consider both your fundraising objectives, but also some of your operations. And they do cross over. We've seen that obviously with things like charity shops and how they've functioned. But the capacity to move some of that online, it's a benefit that you could carry on beyond the lockdown. And we're seeing this too with churches and cathedrals moving to service delivery, ministry, music online, and the fact that it's broadening the reach. The congregation's not so geographically confined anymore, and people are dialing in for the evensong services, whether they're in New York or Sydney. So there are real opportunities there as well, and it's a chance to just step back, use this period to look at and your recovery audit to look at your broader 5-year strategy. I find it tough to build a strategy out beyond that, and a recovery audit's just a chance to refresh what you've got in place, tune it up, and make sure it's ready for the next period, and particularly for that next year. And this is where a more detailed action plan is important. And it's done very quickly, a recovery audit. It's a crisp, snappy process. You've got a plan in front of you and your trustees for delivery within the month. So it's a quick fix, objective view, and it gives you a sure path, a sure set of steps to take on that path to recovery.
Yeah, and I think that point about the 5-year strategy is really important, Andrew, that, we've seen throughout this process charities who've really, really struggled and those who've done really, really well and said, but we're only a year into our 5-year strategy, so we don't need to look at anything. And actually, for most organisations, your strategy has now completely changed because of the pandemic and the changed landscape. So whether you've had a great year or a bad year, it's always a good time to look and reflect and see if that strategy is now right for you going forward.
Mm-hmm. And so you can see there in the fundraising strategy review, it's a more, if you like, broader and more encompassing process. You're taking a close look at your overall fundraising case for support. That's your ambitions, your long-term goals, and your short-term goals. And looking carefully at defining your fundraising methodologies, and therein to the sorts of resources you've got to invest in those particular fundraising methods, and that you need to secure in order to build out your new approaches there. It has to be a timetable and defined budgets, and it's a timetable as well that isn't just about if you like, goal setting from a financial perspective, but it can also be about building out the various projects and programs so that those cases are properly formed and ready to take out for fundraising purposes. And then 2, you need in any good strategy and strategy review, a clear set of way markers so that you can do your evaluation and review process. And it's a healthy moment to look at your governance, things such as your gift policy. Has it been refreshed? The dreaded GDPR policies, etc. And more particularly as well, whether your accounts, restricted funds as opposed to designated funds, all those sorts of important constraints are dealt with as part of your fundraising strategy review. So it comprises 6 pieces here, as you can see. The first one is they're really framed around particular questions. The first one is a position audit. So where are you now? And we all, you might think you know where you are, but when you've been through a position audit, you often surprise yourself as to the places you're in that you may not be aware of. And then really around what are the key learnings and researching what others are doing, trying to look there for some suitable benchmarks. It can often be outside sector, so it's not just one school looking at another school. Depending on the type of fundraising, your geography, also your ambitions, you may want a different set of benchmarks. So that key learning research is helpful for scoping where you're going to from here. And the stakeholder research is more inward looking. It's talking with your stakeholders, your beneficiaries, members of staff, other funders, partners in some of your service delivery, for example, so that you've got a really clear fix on a shared view about where you want to be. The fourth one there is the resources review. Where is the money for where you want to get to? And as I said before, it may be amongst your existing donor base, but it may require you also to reach out and start engaging different stakeholder groups and different sources of funds, and which is important. And then the options appraisal, where are you going? So this is about setting out whether, quite often it's the choices around speed, to be honest with you. How quickly do you want to get there? And that impacts on your resource expenditure as well. If you've got urgent and compelling needs, one of your options is going to require quite a significant input of investment to get off the ground. That's one option. If you're taking a long view to build up an endowment, that's another option. Maybe they're overlapping or interconnected. So this appraisal is a really important piece to forming your final strategy there at point 6. This is so we all understand how these elements lock in together. Right back to the governing body and the trustees understanding where fundraising sits in the delivery of their vision, through to your stakeholders and other partners and the roles that they'll be asked to play to help achieve it. And most importantly, I think with a fundraising strategy, you need to have a clear idea about what it is what does this place look like when you get there? Partly so you can plan the party and celebrate that moment, because it is a major achievement, I think, when you've gone through the building of a strong fundraising strategy and ultimately you're delivering it. And it's important to celebrate that and recognize that as across your whole organization, because it's a big moment. So we have 3 forms of fundraising, just to remind you, and they do lock in together. So we're taking you through a little there. One is your annual fundraising. This is the pink bubbles on the left there. And you've got various tools, which you're all very familiar with, whether it's direct response or direct mail type fundraising tools, events, income generation, all those sorts of steps. The middle one there is your capital fundraising. This is where you're looking to raise a large sum in a relatively short space of time, usually for a specific project or program. And there are opportunities here to dedicate or designate particular gifts. It's much more directed through peer-to-peer asking, face-to-face asking, as it's often described, pledge giving possibly over a period, and talking about tax benefits as well. And then the third is around endowment funding. This is usually legacies and bequests, will-making programs, and there are recognition clubs and other tools in that pool. The 3 work together because someone who may join you giving a regular direct debit gift of £20 a month, £5 a month, £100 a month, whatever, couldn't be asked for a special reason to make a pledge gift for a capital campaign, and may in turn also be somebody that is prepared to leave you a legacy or bequest. So the 3 work very closely together, but the tools are distinctly different and they need to be used discreetly. So there is a knitted together program that you build out when you've created your fundraising strategy.
Okay, so meeting 2021 head on.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, I suspect we will have another challenging year ahead of us, but there are lots of opportunities for us to move forward and have resilient charities. So as we've said, it's the perfect time to review your strategy going forwards. Think about where you want to be. Are you there? Reflect on how the year has been. And as I said previously, think about, does that 5-year strategy actually really work for you anymore? Or do you need to rejig that and readdress perhaps some of the projects that are in there even? Thinking about going digital, more and more organisations have adopted online giving programmes. Now, obviously, that will never replace something like major gifts asking. It never will, but it does make it easier for people to give to you, and it's something that we should all be considering, I think, in this time. Who'd have thought we'd have spent our entire lives on Zoom and Teams and various other meetings, and we've managed to do it. So going digital, and webinars even, going digital hasn't been too bad. Although I do miss face-to-face. I don't know about you, Andrew, I really miss going out, meeting clients, and making plans together on a table, but hopefully we'll be back there soon next year. Communication's more important now than ever before. We've said this throughout the year. Keep communicating with your supporters, and ultimately then keep building those relationships. We've heard really nice stories of, as we saw, that major gifts, people are stepping up and making major gifts, and it's because relationships have continued to be built Charities have reported back with impact statements about what the work that's been delivered, and that encourages more support. Be flexible and adaptable. We're going to talk about a few scenarios in a moment from our client portfolio where they've particularly been flexible and adaptable in the current climate and taken advantage of opportunities, fundraising opportunities, partnership opportunities, and that's really important, I think, as things continually change. And finally, share experiences. It's been really nice to see. I've seen a lot of it on LinkedIn. Charities helping each other and saying, this is what we're doing. This has worked really well for us, and not thinking, oh, I don't want to tell them my secrets because, this is a good thing for us. Actually, charities really have been working together, I think. And it's important. And it's important when times are hard as well, that we do have other colleagues who understand the fundraising world that we can pick up the phone to and ask advice and share opinions and experiences with. So first example for us is Peterborough Cathedral. So we started working with the cathedral back in April to look at some strategic planning, so a full fundraising strategy review for them there. They had a lot of new team in place, so it was important to kind of set that from the start and let them run with the programme. Interestingly, their focus has been largely on income generating sustainability projects, and I think particularly at this time that's been really appealing to supporters, because yes, everybody needs money at this time, every charity has needed money, but actually this is about longer term sustainability, so that revenue generating projects that an investor, a donor can see, okay, I give X amount and it will enable the cathedral to raise X amount per year, and that's been really popular. They're installing new unrestricted giving programs. We all like unrestricted gifts. We'd have all gifts unrestricted if we could. But things like, so the image there is the Christmas Keys campaign, which they've just launched, which will be rolled out into a Cathedral Keys programme next year, which is their kind of recognition vehicle for the cathedral. They've been very reactive to fundraising opportunities. The director of fundraising at the cathedral has been fantastic. Every time a potential funding opportunity has come up, whether it be the National Lottery Heritage Fund or other funders providing resilience and recovery funding, she's been on that, she's been applying, and she's done incredibly well from it. So being able to be reactive and act at that moment has been really important. And again, adapted to a digital world. It's not always the easiest for churches and cathedrals to get online and get their teams online, whether that be for meetings or whether that be broadcasting services or online giving, etc. But they've done that, and they've really benefited from staying very engaged with their community through providing those online services.
It's been amazing, Amy, just with Peterborough, because you and I have had a long-standing relationship with Peterborough going back decades, actually. Just how the regular supporters have come forward again. Yeah. All those efforts to stay in touch, the newsletters, etc., has meant really when the tough moments came, they've been able to go back to that well of support. And there's been a huge amount of goodwill and a desire to keep the cathedral functioning and there for the community. So I've seen something similar, I might add, down at Gloucester Cathedral as well, where I've seen some staggering major gifts come through from long-term committed families and supporters in both cases, recognising the importance of these places for community sanity, really, as well as ministry. So yeah, it's a pleasing example, but it does really show the importance of long-term sustained cultivation and support programs. That this doesn't happen overnight, does it?
Not at all, not at all. Next one, completely wacky and totally different.
You love it.
I do love it. This is the Noah's Ark Foundation, based in South Africa, which will see one of, if not the world's biggest conservation project underway. And, it's a £5 billion project with 3.5 billion looking at philanthropic resources. Which you may think at this time, insane. Why are you embarking on this? But, the team invested in the strategic planning. We spent the entire summer looking at the strategy for a global campaign. And actually they've thought, do you know what, this project is needed now. And we've done our work. We know what our strategy is. We know how we're going to attack it. So yes, we could wait for 18 months until hopefully the pandemic's passed, but that's 18 months too late. We have a plan, let's execute the plan. And they're going for it with a £3.5 billion global campaign. There's also a TV series in production. So they're ploughing on with that as well. Courting their major gift prospects, obviously looking at some very high-end gifts, it takes a lot of time and effort. And that's being supported by a global PR program, which broke across the world at the weekend. You may have seen some of it in the national media here and overseas as well. But completely different example of an organisation who is, not letting the pandemic affect their plans, but has also done that in a way, not just ploughing on blindly, but invested in that strategic planning first.
This one here was one of mine. It's close to home at Kenilworth. Interesting, this is a state school, a multi-academy trust that's in the process of moving from 2 sites to 1. It's a major build. It's a secondary school, so it's a £50 million or thereabouts new school building project. And we'd done the feasibility study. We'd got everything lined up. The major gift prospects were being well cultivated. Things were moving along quite nicely for our £1.5 million capital campaign, and boom, hey, we hit COVID. Everything stopped. What do we do? And whilst we'd got underway with the planning phase, what we've really been doing over these 6-7 months is actually extending that planning phase. We went through the process of enormous amounts of communication with the prospects. We've been fine-tuning the project and particularly the elements for fundraising purposes, and we're reconfiguring the team now to better reflect those changed opportunities. Some businesses that we had been cultivating have faced very tough times. Others have done incredibly well. And the great thing for Kenilworth School is it is Kenilworth's school. So it is that town in Warwickshire's main and only secondary school. So if you're from or in Kenilworth, this is going to be exciting news as this project starts this coming spring. So what the reboot we've been doing is refining and enhancing, making more personal, if you like, the fundraising case. They're talking possibly less about buildings and more about the young people this school's going to shape and the future generations that will benefit from this. We've been working hard with our prospects, in many cases engaging and informing them. And if you're aware of those, the whole program of prospect evaluation and rating, that's been helpful to us in getting a clearer fix about who to ask for how much and when. And we've been getting a sharper focus on the elements of the project that we want to raise philanthropic support for. So that just strengthens out the case and makes it more compelling. So it hasn't been wasted time. The judgment now is around when do we restart, if you like, the more public-facing sides of this. It was good to have schools return, and I think that was an element of normality for us that we all benefited from, but it's not yet really been possible to engage the wider school communities. So hopefully early next year that will feel and be very different for us.
Fabulous. So we're going to move on to some questions. Andrew, can I ask you to look at the Q&A section online, because I have control of the mouse and I'll drive everyone insane with going like this across the screen if I do it. So hopefully we've had a few questions come in.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I've not yet seen any, so please do put your questions into the Q&A section of this webinar, and I've got an open line here. I've had, though, Liz Hancock from Mary Evans Hospice in Nuneaton get in touch prior to the webinar, Amy, and she was asking us how to keep asking for support without triggering donor fatigue or appearing to have a poor business model. For example, you're fundraising because you're failing.
I mean, from my perspective, I'd say demonstrate that impact. as we mentioned earlier, so when, your supporters, you may have made an ask at the start of the pandemic, show what you've done with that, show the impact that had on your patients and the families in your care, and that will inspire your donors to support you further. Donors always want to see that their money's been well spent, don't they? So that would be the main thing for me, would be demonstrate impact.
And the interesting thing is about choosing your moments for asking. And this is a particularly good time of year. I mean, there are many people presently who are actually feeling a lot better off than they have done. They didn't spend money on summer holidays, maybe. They certainly aren't paying for those long commutes, but they're still working incredibly hard and appreciating things in their community, like their hospices, Liz, and the care that you've given and your staff have given throughout this pandemic, which must have been incredibly tough. So I think you've got a reasonable moment to ask people to pause and reflect this Christmas, to maybe share a little cheer with those who are continuing to do what you and your team are doing at Mary Ann Evans Hospice. And also, I think if the ask in this case is more it's delivered as personally as possible, rather than just blanket asking. As you know, because we've talked about it, Liz, you as chief executive possibly need to have a direct chat with some of your major donor prospects in the past and give them an update on how your year's gone, and the sorts of challenges you've got coming up in the year ahead. So maybe that's a good way to frame your ask. And the final part of your question, which I think is actually a really good one, is fundraising is not an example, in my view, that your business model is failing. Quite the opposite. It's very often around the opportunity that you can't now deliver because you can only go so far on the business model you've got. So in that sense, I would turn it around, Liz, and present it as a positive, that you need some new investment to do new things. Amy, we've had a couple of, I hope that answers your questions, Liz, but give me a bell anyway if you want to talk it through further. Can I put to you, we've had a couple more come in, one from Mark Davey, who asks, how can we forecast fundraising income in 2021 with so much uncertainty at the moment, Amy?
Well, indeed, how can we? It is a big challenge, and I know a lot of organisations are thinking, how do we set budgets? But again, that's why reviewing your strategy is actually the perfect time. So as Andrew touched upon just before with the last question, with Liz's question, now's the time to engage your supporter base and say, this is what we want to do for the next year, and try and gauge levels of support. And particularly with your major donors, having conversations with them now about your plans, excuse me, and testing that proposition with them will help you to gauge the levels of support that might be there from different elements. We never know, do we, with corporates, for example, whether that corporate who gives you a regular monthly gift will be able to continue doing that. We can't predict that, but by communicating with the donors as much as possible, it does help us to gauge where money may come from.
And if I may, Amy, I think, Mark, if you're doing a recovery audit, you will set targets with a tolerance. You'll do a sensitivity testing, if you like, going into the year against the different income streams. And some are probably responding, even in COVID, fairly well, and others are responding very poorly. And we saw that actually in the survey, didn't we?
Yeah.
So you could model your income against a range and try and tighten it as best you can. By examining some of those risks. But I think to try and, as we've done in the past, take last year's performance and add 5% to get this year's budget is not going to work. No. It's going to have to be a lot more sophisticated, with a short answer. Sorry, long-winded answer for you, Mark, but I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, interestingly as well, the data that's coming back from some of the legacy providers, so Legacy Foresight, for those of you who follow them, are saying that whilst this year we might see a slight dip in legacies that come to fruition because house prices dropping, etc. So the value of a legacy gift might be slightly lower this year. They're actually predicting now, whereas initially they thought, yikes, this might have a real impact on legacy giving. They're actually predicting now to have minimal or little effect, and actually more people left bequests in their wills during the pandemic than they did beforehand. So, it's a very difficult time to project our income, but some statistics are supporting that at least some income streams may not suffer too much.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Here we have Charlie Meehan, who's an expert corporate fundraiser. Welcome, Charlie. Good to have you with us. Charlie's asking us, Amy, how do other charities here deal with the challenge of high demand for corporate volunteering and limited or no realistic opportunities to offer? So there's lots wanting to do corporate volunteering, but how can they do it given the COVID situation? Have you any thoughts on that?
Do you know what? I haven't had any experience of that over the pandemic. I guess that's a question more for the charities that are online with us to see how they've been dealing with it. I mean, there are ways of, it's not the usual, can you come in and paint the walls, because that's not allowed at the moment, but perhaps things about organising online events and fundraising events and doing it that way perhaps, or offering online guidance for people, depending if it's professional services, can they do that way? It's taking things virtually, I guess.
And thinking digitally, it's interesting how some of the corporate volunteering can be focused, particularly in an education sector, about online tutoring and support. And that's not just to students. Sometimes it can be, to teachers and academics who might need help, if you like, in an online world with some of their presentation skills or their networking or research projects. I think in the broader national charity context, Charlie, which I know is more you're seeing, it is though about remembering that corporate volunteering is all about involvement. And I take your point at how you actually express that in this, where really that lots of corporates do things for team building purposes. How that can be expressed in a digital context is much more challenging. But look, if we can share some best examples, we'll do that, Charlie. And likewise, if you could with us, we'd be really grateful. It's a good question, though. We have two questions from an anonymous attendee. I always like those. So if I may, with the first, Amy, is what do you do when your fundraising campaign board seems to be demoralized and some trustees are not really on side? Wow, that's actually, that doesn't just rely on COVID. That can happen at any time. What are your thoughts on that, Amy?
I was just going to say, that is not a COVID situation. I think we have all experienced that at one time or another, haven't we? I guess there's different ways to look at it. Is it demoralised because the fundraising challenge is so great at the moment and you're struggling to raise funds? In which case, get them involved in looking at the strategy and planning a new way forward. Is it because so much pressure has been put on them because you've been so busy? And how to address that and think about it. Remember, as part of looking at your strategy, what you can also do is consider your skills audit of trustees and volunteer boards as well. You may have people who are thinking, this is the right time for me to step back, actually, and it's an opportunity for you to refresh your board, or it's a good opportunity to have a really, honest and frank conversation with them and find out what's troubling them, how to support them going forward. Is it that your trustees want some additional training on online sessions or face-to-face asking, etc.? What would you add, Andrew?
It's interesting though. I actually think one of the toughest things to do in working with volunteers in fundraising is to actually fire the ones that aren't working. How do you do that in a way that doesn't cause all sorts of problems? It is difficult. And in some respects, allowing people to retire with good grace, making them, if you like, vice presidents of the campaign, or giving them some title, but enables them to step back without feeling as embarrassed about it. This could be an opportunity for you, anonymous attendee, to refresh that board. The other part to it, and I've seen this actually just recently, is getting done with iPads in this case, getting the board close to the beneficiaries, taking the dreaded iPad to the scene, if you like, or the reason why you're fundraising. and showing them why and where and how this money's going to, and giving them that live update, and then getting them to comment and ask questions. The trouble with the world that we're in at the moment is I think people have become very removed and in some cases quite desensitized, and to enliven them again, you've really got to work doubly hard to bring the case to life, and express it to them in a meaningful way that really calls on them to do something in the short term, rather than just sort of sit around a board meeting table, because that's the way fundraising boards used to work. Is you just attended, you dealt with the papers, and you didn't do very much quite often between board meetings. So maybe there's a chance here, Amy, for us to reset the way your fundraising board operates by, helping those who aren't functioning to finish and leave with good grace, get them closer to the case and bring the case more alive, and to get them to do more work between board meetings so they've got something to brag about maybe when they come together. Could be interesting.
Yeah, I think that point about getting them close to it, you just reminded me then of the summer, if you remember, when we were on the call with Peterborough and we were watching the fly-through of being inside the cathedral. And we were all, we're in the cathedral, because we hadn't experienced it for so long.
It was quite emotional.
It's a special place to all of us for very different reasons. But actually seeing it and feeling like I was there, it kind of gives you that energy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. No, it was really, really very moving. It's funny. Anyway, iPads are amazing things. Even your phone, it's amazing how close you can get to things. Our anonymous attendee follows on with a further question to us, Amy. Any thoughts on best approach for a legacy campaign in the current environment?
Yes.
Go on then.
Well, as you know, legacy campaigns are my favourite thing. And interestingly, the data coming back from the survey was pretty much 50-50 split, that some people thought absolutely legacies are now more important than ever, and others thought now is not the time to launch a legacy campaign. However, in my opinion, it's probably the perfect time to launch a legacy campaign, not only because people are questioning their mortality, and thinking about things like will making and legacies. And it's not a sense of taking advantage of that, because a legacy campaign can be launched at any time if your communications are sensitive. The main advice I would say to you is, do not just suddenly blanket mail all your supporters with a new legacy programme, because then it will look like you're kind of perhaps being a bit insensitive. Good legacy campaigns are run as major gifts programs.
Yeah,
it's about personal approaches, which can still be done online at the moment. Having conversations with your donors, perhaps running a survey to think about what do people want in a legacy program. Are they wanting recognition, etc. One of our earlier webinars we did on legacy programs, and we touched on this. We discussed it in full, but we touched on the kind of what you would need in your content for that. So feel free to go back and check that one out. But I would say, there's never a wrong time to launch a legacy program. People will die month on month, year on year, regardless. And if you do it in the right way and you are sensitive to your donors and you run it like a major gifts program, you shouldn't have any negative impact at all on the perception of the organisation.
And actually remember too that one of the main motivators for leaving a legacy is the desire that we all have for a degree of immortality, not for us personally, but for the things that we cherish, our values, the institutions that have been a major part of our lives, and that we want to see, prosper in the future. This is actually quite a good time to have that conversation. I think there's people that are reflecting, as you say, Amy, and probably re-examining their own, plans for wills and other things. It is a time when people are asking questions about what's really important to them in their lives. So I think that's a good question, anonymous attendee. Thank you very much. Hope that's been helpful. It's interesting also, one of the chat sides, Amy, that's come in from Jan Hind, is around the profile of volunteers and that how that's changed. I don't know if you've seen it, but indicating, Jan saying that fewer older people are actually volunteering because of a fearfulness around COVID, understandably. But others have stepped up, and that's what's going on up in Rochdale with their emergency hubs up there. So there's also a chance actually to bring on some of our younger volunteers and leadership possibly in our organisation. So I know, Jan, you were responding to an earlier question, but I just thought it was a helpful reflection also when we looked at legacies. Thank you for that. I've got now Andy Castle asking us a question, Amy. He's asking, with all the additional emergency COVID funding that's been made available this year, is it likely that grant funding is going to be more restricted, reduced going forward as a result? What's your thoughts on that one?
Interesting one, and again, quite difficult to predict. A lot of the forecasts are saying that grant funders will see their income levels dip because of investments. However, some are invested very well and have seen increases in their portfolios. So it's very hard to judge who will and who will not have money to distribute. We've already seen funders like the National Lottery Heritage Fund opening their doors again. Their programmes open again on the 25th. Earlier than expected. They originally said 2021 earliest, and they've realised now that actually, there's lots of projects out there, including smaller projects that couldn't apply for the COVID funding that need their help, and they're opening their doors again. Arts Council again opening up, and again we're running a webinar on this in January, I believe it is, which is we've publicised. But if you need any details, I believe it's on the website. But if not, get in touch with us. And we'll be doing a review of the grant-making scene at that, and looking at the state of play, how the land lies from both those kind of national funders, but also the private grant-making trusts and foundations as well.
Andy, the big driver here is watching the stock market and more broadly the economic, output. If we come out of COVID and we see a big step back up in economic growth and a step back up in the performance of the stock market, then there will be funds available in these major trusts and foundations for distribution, and as ever they will focus and be looking for biggest impact. So it's down to us as professional fundraisers to bring forward proposals that tick those boxes, but are really sort of urgent and compelling and address the needs that we're going to have coming out of COVID. I wouldn't be anticipating, unless there's a flatline economic performance, that the grant funders are going to start stepping back. Far from it. I think that'll be lovely.
We've seen many six-figure gifts, haven't we, during the last 8-9 months for non-COVID projects. So and often very unrestricted giving now we're getting out of grant funders, whereas before it was all you had to get to this amount before you got that amount, and you had to jump through that hoop and do the cartwheel and then stand up and sing "Hey Presto," and then you got your money. But now they're just going, here, you're good, have the money. Which is refreshing. Okay. Thanks, Andy. That's a good one. With more to come on that, and I encourage you to come along maybe to that webinar in January if you're up for it. Mark Davey, Amy asked us a question. With the additional pressure put on fundraising teams this year and potentially next year, what advice could you give regarding supporting them and ensuring their general well-being? This is fundraising teams, did you say, as in the fundraising professionals?
Yeah. Yes, fundraising team.
Yeah.
Mark's question.
I think you're absolutely right, Mark. I think fundraisers have been under exceptional pressure this year, whether that's launching and running a hugely successful crisis appeal or battling for every penny to keep that charity afloat. I think you're absolutely right. Really important for me in these kind of distant times has been actually making that effort. And, we all get fed up of Zoom calls and what have you, but actually making the effort to connect with people and check in with people and see how they're doing. And as I said in one of the earlier slides, share experiences. So within a sector, and I know particularly NHS charities are particularly good at it, helping each other. A lot of the larger charities will give advice to the smaller ones on programs they've run and rolled out, etc. It's helping each other out, sharing experiences, and keeping in touch with people, really.
It's funny because it's almost trying to find a way to keep that conversation that used to be done when, you're in making coffee together or going out getting some lunch or something. And How do you do all that when you're working so separately? So it's partly having a willingness to share funny pictures and celebrate those moments when you can, there's been a success or a milestone's been achieved, or something that we know is meaningful, that's a bit novel, has happened. So I think it's, as a manager, it's being investing the time to, if you like, focus on and research those things and share them in sensitive ways and encourage others to do that. Equally, it's about checking when people start, I don't know, getting a bit dark, or do you know what I mean? The negative spiral that can happen. So it's being brave enough to check that and say, come on, time out. That's not going to help us here. I think it's being prepared for that and knowing how to deal with it. So as managers, I think it's going to take a lot more work, Mark, is the short answer. This is where you earn your pay in managing your fundraising team. But if you can do it, we're seeing some outstanding performance from those teams that have gelled and risen to this challenge, haven't we, Amy?
Absolutely. And I think people have been working particularly hard, not in a fundraising scenario, but a friend of mine said her workplace, which is a commercial workplace, have actually now installed a enforced dinner hour between 12 and 1, no meetings, to stop people working through the dinner hour and, or lunch hour, I'm northern, apologies, working through the lunch hour and, eating 5 minutes at your desk, which isn't healthy for anybody. So things like that can help.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
For me, the other day, I received a card in the post from a friend, a funny card with a little note in with something that had happened. And actually, because everything's online, receiving that in the post was really nice, and it really, really made me smile. So just think about those different ways we can connect.
That is very powerful. Snail mail is so unusual, if it's not rubbish, that it has much more impact than it used to do. That's a really good suggestion. I mean, we should remember that even with our donors, writing a little note saying, today this happened thanks to your support, or I thought of you when this happened, or it was a year ago you joined our board, and what a year it's been, and thanks for all you've given us. Maybe once at the beginning of a day while you're having your coffee, guys, write 5 notes, handwritten notes, and post them out to the people that have been important to you this year, and particularly coming up to Christmas. You shouldn't just have to wait to do Christmas cards to do that, I guess. But I like that. I mean, we still carry on with the bad habits we used to have when we weren't in this lockdown situation, like eating over your computer while you're trying to get your emails done, or but and so that hasn't helped us. That's a really good thought, Amy. Enforced break. I'm going to remind you of that. Well, next time we've got Simon, beg your pardon, Crookall, who's asked us the question: any good ideas for cultivating new prospects when we can't have events?
Yeah, it's really challenging, isn't it?
How do you give them a drink, Amy? That's the hard bit.
No. People are getting very creative with this. It's all about creating something special, I guess, isn't it? I know I was speaking to a hospital early on in the pandemic, and for their kind of really high-end donors, just 3 or 4 at a time, they were getting one of the consultants to do a guided video tour around the hospital as it was quiet, and showing them where new facilities were going to be, etc. Having that kind of, still having a really bespoke experience, albeit not in person. So I think it's about creating those creative ways of engaging people. Another idea, which I think I've mentioned on previous webinars, which I was told about at a conference by it was a kind of wildlife charity dealing with a local area, and they got their rangers while they were out and about to take selfie videos and say, thanks to your gift this year, our ducks on this pond are all healthy, the swans had cygnets, blah, blah, blah. Just like a 90-second clip which got emailed to their supporters within that area. Yeah. Just as a bit of that personal update to keep the cultivation going. So it's creative ways like that, I think, that we we need to look at?
Well, also, I had a situation actually where there was a prospect dinner, and what happened was the dinner was delivered by Coat, and it came in a box. It was magnificent, with a bottle of wine and various courses, and then you all got online, and there was a facilitator, and we had a chat on the thing and a bit of a presentation, and we ate our dinner and a glass of wine, and it was actually quite passably enjoyable. And I was reflecting on that because I can imagine we're coming up to a situation where we're going to need to be able to do a hybrid form of event and even meetings, because with the vaccination, it'll take time to roll out. It'll be done across different age groups, and we know that, and it'll be, but there will still be some that will want to and will need to be shielding. So they're often the people we really, really don't want to have excluded. So I think our challenge is, how do we create hybrid events, not just online events, so that people can share online as well as participate face-to-face, or in a safe, distanced way, face-to-face, if you take my point.
Yeah.
We're going to have to be really creative. That's a good question, Simon. Thank you very much. The next one is from our mate Graham Pearce, another fellow Aussie, brave man, and still celebrating, I'm sure, against the New Zealand, against the All Blacks win. Graham, your question: any recommendations for new trustee induction programs and charity trustee indoctrination? Yeah, that's a nice thought. Indoctrination engagement in our current circumstances. Amy, how would we go about inducting trustees just now?
Gosh, well, again, it's challenging, isn't it? We can't go out for coffee or drinks and kind of get to know each other. I would say it's about being as personal as we possibly can be in these times. As trustees, you need to feel part of a team. So whether that's, not just having a Zoom call with all 8 trustees on, including the new trustee, but actually perhaps chairman of trustees might say, okay, every trustee will pick up the phone to Mr. X, Mrs. Y, new trustee, over the next 2 weeks and have a one-on-one conversation with them to bring them on board and get to know them. Obviously, there's the usual packs that you can deliver in terms of written documentation and governance and what have you. But for me, it would be feeling part of the team and that personal approach. Yeah,
and we're seeing that, Amy, with people being inducted into businesses that have never worked in them, never physically visited them. Graham, I'd set out a program, like on a day, that's your induction day, and a series of appointments with different people Skyping in or connecting, Zooming in these days, so that they get a full briefing. And there's probably more opportunity for them to engage with the full work of the charity now than they might have done if you had to deal with them face to face. So anyway, good luck with that. But it's a key thing to focus on, because without that, the engine room starts to grind to a halt.
Yeah.
We've got 2 more questions. Do you think we can clear them, Amy?
Let's do it.
First one, okay, from Grace Brearley, who asks us, in April, we're combining with another museum/heritage trust to strengthen our offer and financial sustainability. Good on you, Grace. That's a good call. How would you launch a new trust to engage with donors when you can't hold a face-to-face event?
Okay, yeah, challenging. I think you've got really interesting times ahead, because there'll be the merger of not just kind of databases and all that kind of element, but actually creating that new vision for the organisation. And that for me would be the key thing to make sure you've got right before any kind of launch is underway, is what is the new vision of this charity? And obviously let's make that positive. Let's not say, well, perhaps the 2 organisations were struggling on their own. It's about creating a new and stronger partnership and vision. Launching that, gosh, yeah, really, really challenging. I guess obviously you've got, what you don't want to do is have that non-personal mailer to everybody. Yeah. There needs to be a way that you can kind of bring people together, whether it is smaller sessions, webinars.
Could you do a tease, like have a live streamed moment where you announce either the name of the new trust, or there's some celebrity that gets on and says something, awards something, the point being is to get people to log on and find out something. Do you know what I mean? As the launch, because otherwise they're coming for the networking and a glass of wine, aren't they? But you can't do that by Zoom, not as easily anyway. So make it a bit more of a theatrical moment.
Yeah, it could be using social as well, like you're saying, having snippets go out. I don't know if you're using the social media channels and whether you use Instagram and Facebook and what have you. Are there key characters in your organisations, as Andrew was saying, whether that's some fictional character that might get acted out in a museum, or characters that are very well known who can do snippets and put that out and tell the story of your new organisation. Try and make it a bit fun. Everyone needs a laugh and something interesting to watch at the moment, don't they? So
it's got more akin actually to a drama production or something along those lines than a set piece corporate event. I think your launch, Grace, that's where I go, because I think depending which organizations are merging, I bet you there's some great stories behind both of those organizations. Okay, last question then is again from our anonymous attendee who's offering us bonus points here, Amy. Can you share an example of a cultivation event online that had been successful for clients? But the bonus point here is if we can share a format where attendees have actually interacted with each other meaningfully. Now that's interesting, quite how you define meaningfully. What's your thoughts, Amy?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if this is meaningful, but I have heard of people playing online bingo and and various other things.
Very northern, Amy, very northern.
To bring people together and have a bit of fun together. Gosh, that is a tricky one. I'm not sure I'm going to get my bonus point.
Well, I can share one. Remember I talked about the iPad thing?
Yeah.
This is the idea around when we were sort of socially distanced, but not. You run an event. In this case, it was Evensong, where a person was hosted by a live person at the Evensong who took them in as an iPad, and they went together and sat and enjoyed the music, socially distanced, and shared it and commented around it and got a sort of tour of it, and then afterwards went and had a glass of sherry with the Dean, socially distanced.
Very nice.
And I think allowing, just letting the shackles off and allowing a bit more freedom in the way those events run, it's going to be a bit risky. But in other ways, I think it's going to be much more akin to the sort of experience you'd get if you attended yourself. You
know what? Anyway, that's a really lovely anti-loneliness idea, though, isn't it? Is there an elderly neighbour who would love to have gone to that event who can't, who you could take with you virtually? That's actually a really lovely idea.
Well, Amy, Graham, I think, is popping some more ideas up there in the chat, and I'm sure my friend Robert Brooke, who is in Salcombe and couldn't be with us because of technical reasons, given his experience at Shakespeare's Globe all those years ago, raising a large bucket of money for that education rehearsal centre. No doubt he will let us know some thoughts as well. But that's the end of our Q&A, Amy. Brilliant.
Listen, we're out of time, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that's been helpful. Any further questions you've got, drop Andrew or I a line. Our details are on screen there. As I said, we're recording and we will post this online. Anyone who doesn't have a copy of our book already and would like a copy, this is the book. Gifted Fundraising, drop Julie a line, she'll pop one in the post for you. And again, if you want us to email you a copy of the survey once that's out, again, just drop Julie a note and we'll ping that out to you. But thanks everyone, stay well, and hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Cheers, bye-bye. Bye.